TraceLink's Roddy Martin talks about the science of continuous improvement with Dino Petrarolo, Senior Vice President of global consulting firm Competitive Capabilities International. That's right now on the Patient-Driven Supply Network podcast.
So Dino, welcome to TraceLink's Thought Leadership Series. It's really great to interview you based on both my experience with you at SAB Miller and also your work at Competitive Capabilities International. Very exciting space, and certainly this whole agility, resilience, and reliability is right in your bailiwick. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about your experience and highlight some of the experiences, and then we'll have a discussion around this holy grail of agility, resilience, and reliability. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. I think maybe just by way of introduction, as an industrial engineer by heart, followed the Toyota production system from its early days before it was quite vogue and hype, and certainly have been a firm believer in an inside-out approach. So a lot of the work that we've done over the years has been, starting off in manufacturing and then going into the supply chain, whether it be internally in the supply chain operation of the company, or into suppliers and doing supply development work, which we've done over the years as well. More recently, the approach has been, from a supply chain perspective, has been to maybe follow more of a Procter & Gamble type of approach, where it's more of an outside-in approach. So look at the whole system and rather focus on the key levers of the system to improve an operation. And so my personal approach has changed quite a bit over the years. Although we still do a lot of the inside-out approach, there's much more of this end-to-end supply chain approach with, for example, a large chemical company we're working with right now, where we've gone in and started off with SNOP as a process. So having said that, for me, the one thing that CCI has done incredibly well, and we were one of the first companies when I was with SAB Miller to actually use the digital platform of CCI, which basically standardized, codified the improvement process itself. So many companies actually codify their transactional processes, their core business processes in some kind of way. They digitize it. Some companies have been digitizing for many years, but very few companies have actually had the length of time that we've had in actually codifying and standardizing the improvement journey itself. And I think that's been a very, very powerful approach for many, many companies. So I'll stop there.
Dino, can I pick up on that point, because I think you make a very important. I think the key point I want to pick up is codify and use the platform for the journey, right? So this word platform has got many, many different dimensions, and I think Amazon's a platform, SAP would call themselves an ERP platform, etc. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what exactly is a platform. And I think what was profound to me, and you've already said it, but I want to draw it out, and that is by codifying the best practices and the let's say the mindsets, behaviors, the practices, the tools, the methodologies to lead you from stage 1 reacting to stage 5 operating as a network of this fantastically codified digital platform that leads you down the journey. So, I mean, would you agree? You'd agree with that perspective, right? So, I mean, that's the track and the IWS and the other platforms that companies have been deploying.
Yes, and of course, there's been there's many dimensions to the value that such a platform brings. In our case, what we've done is we've as you rightfully said, it's a maturity-based system. So it's although the progression is quite known. So if you take any of the practices or tools, how do you get better at it? You could take a safety as an example. What are the best companies in the world doing for safety, in terms of safety? And of course, you'll go and look at a nuclear plant, because safety tends to be very important in a nuclear plant. But most companies are they're on somewhere in that spectrum. So what we've done is we've looked at, well, what if you're at a low maturity in any of those dimensions, or any dimension? What are the next steps that you should be taking? And I think that's been a real benefit for us. Another aspect of what we do is to say, well, if you are going to improve your approach, your practices, as you said, your tools, etc., what benefit do you get? So what we've done is we've also spelled that out, that if you do take certain steps, that you will get certain benefits. And then, of course, linked to it, how long does it typically take? So, of course, it's variable. It depends on the type of organization, size, etc. But there is a general, shall we say, a benchmark of how quickly, how rapidly you can improve. And then, of course, I think linked to a lot of what you're doing these days, I think if we just focus a little bit on the standardization of the improvement process itself, many companies are already locked into perhaps their transactional system, or perhaps the protocols of their industry, like in pharmaceuticals. So they already have a mindset of being very rigid, very, very standardized. And so for them to accept that you come in and you have a soft approach to bringing people together to participate in problem solving, to have some form of improved teamwork, those don't necessarily go well if they're too loose and fuzzy in those types of organizations. Right. So, and that's why I started off by saying that what we've done is we've actually codified and standardized the improvement journey itself. Right. And that talks quite nicely to I think to those environments. So I think maybe I'll pause there, but if you have any other questions.
I think it's really important. And I mean, the other point I want to emphasize is, when you and I were both at CCI way back, and we coined the expression, I think it was Pat coined the expression of integrative improvement. I mean, I think what a lot of companies misunderstand, and I think, now that we're in a new wave of agile, right? The pandemic has said, oh, you're not agile enough, you now got to be agile, is that you can't just go and implement a system and be agile. I mean, you need to be integrative across people, process, technologies, and leadership. And I think that's the codify the journey itself perspective. Because if you've got 4 or 5 different projects that are not connected, you're not necessarily going to improve the overall the overall business process of serving patients. So I just wanted to emphasize that integrative, and the fact that agility, resilience, and reliability come from people, process, technology, and leadership applied on an integrative journey. So, but carry on.
Yeah, I think the integrated aspect is quite important. And many years ago, and Roddy, you'll remember this, I worked with a guy called Kobayashi in Japan. Yeah. He's unfortunately passed away now. And he had a lovely analogy. He used to love his bean sprouts. And he had this bean sprout analogy where what he said is that if you focused on one single factor, and it would be like a bean sprout or a bean that you put in the ground and you water, and it starts growing, the sprout starts growing. And he said you could get a lot of results from that, But so, for example, if you focused purely on planning, or you focus purely, if it's a manufacturing operation, purely on maintenance, you may not get the full benefits, because at the first sign of turbulence, if you picture this bean sprout, there's a bit of air or turbulence, it'll fall over. So what he said is that you need to grow all these little beans, or plant them next to each other, and then water them and grow them so that the bean sprouts form a tree trunk. Because these things are all interrelated, so you improve your IT systems, your transactional processes. You have to improve the way people work together, the teamwork, the softer things, the way that you deal with issues or problems, and so on. So all of these things get interrelated. It's unlikely that you'll be good at quality manufacturing if you've got very poor maintenance systems,
right,
and so on. So integration, that's why we focused very heavily on building our platform so that it integrates the practices in such a way that helps you improve as a system.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I mean, I think the point is that, P&G always used to amaze me because with their integrative platform, their IWS, they were continually looking for the lowest common denominator. In other words, across those people, process, technology, and leadership, what is holding this process back from delivering its full capabilities? And so therefore, it's not a one-time assessment. It's a continual assessment of your maturity on that journey. And I think that it's great that you emphasize the point that it is a journey, it is a codified journey, and it needs to be led top down because it's an onerous investment. I mean, I think one of the interesting perspectives that's come out of this whole agile focus in the pandemic is, you can isolate lots of disruptive events in the supply chain and react to them and go fix them one by one. But if you just deal with an event as an isolated incident and fix the root cause of the event and don't look at systematically at the event and all the issues around it, there's a good chance it's going to come back again. And I think that's really where this codified approach to the journey is so fundamental, because you're going to get one issue one day, and when you dig hard and you do your 5 whys and you look, you're going to find out, well, there's something else that actually caused this issue. So talk a little bit. I know that, we can't mention the company's name, but you recently were involved in a pharmaceutical company. I mean, talk a little bit about your experiences that you found in a pharma environment, because the big enemy in pharma is that we're validated by the FDA, and so therefore we can't change anything. And that is, truly an enemy of continuous improvement if you overdo it. So talk a little bit about your experiences.
Sure. So the way this started is that an ex-colleague of mine, in fact, joined this pharmaceutical company as chief operating officer. And he phoned me up and said, come talk to and see how you can help us. But he said, just understand that, I've been here for a month or two, and I've been told I cannot change anything because of all the protocols. And in fact, this company sells not only into the US, but into Europe and Brazil and others. And in fact, I think he, if I remember correctly, said that the most difficult were the Brazilian
right,
in terms of the authorities there. And quite interesting, he said, well, have a look anyway. And we started looking at some of their processes and quite quickly saw that, well, let's start with the peripheral ones that, are not under the auspices of these protocols. And then started moving in closer to some processes that could give them leverage. So, for example, they in their processes they had to send samples to their laboratory, and their laboratory was a bottleneck. And what we did is, without going into too much detail, we used lean principles and treated the laboratory as a factory, and used some of these visual management concepts, and as I said, concepts, very well-known concepts in Lean. And that immediately improved their situation, and they started taking note. And of course, we've been working with them now for, I think, about 3 or 4 years, and continue to do so. So we challenged that things couldn't be improved that easily, and that was, even to them, was quite a revelation. So
yeah, no, I think it's a very good indicator for us, because as TraceLink, we've pulled together this digital network platform, which is not unlike Amazon. It's based on an Amazon Web Services platform, and we track the flow of product flowing over our platform. The point being that at any point in time, there's issues somewhere. One of the partners, it could be a logistics issue, it could be a quality issue, but the importance is having visibility of the issue and quickly being able to constitute the right team around analyzing the issue, fixing the problem, and making sure that it doesn't come back again. And I think, to close the full loop on this discussion of ours, what I really admire in Track and in IWS and these integrative improvement systems is the fact that you've codified that journey, because it's onerous to put multidisciplinary, multi-level teams together to solve these problems. Look at the implications on, say, a patient or a customer all the way downstream, and realize that what you're doing today, is going to impact the customer. So, I love the story, because I think it's very indicative of the industry.
I think if Roddy, if I could give one more perspective, and that is also very well documented in terms of, if you look at quality systems, which is probably, in terms of the hierarchy of factors in healthcare, is obviously quite important. And the lean movement and companies like Toyota emphasize the fact that their approach to improving quality is an integrated one, is a participative one, and one that essentially looks at errors. And errors before they become defects. Whereas,
right,
the kind of traditional system would say, let's take the example of, if your doctor sends you for blood tests, and you might go to a clinic and a nurse takes your blood, you kind of assume that when the blood goes to the laboratory that does the testing, they've got gauge R&R, reproducibility and repeatability of the lab technician doing the tests, and that the test will be done correctly. But that's not where the problems lie. The problems don't lie in the core of the blood test. They lie in everything outside of it. The nurse that took your sample, did she or he write your name correctly on the vial? Did the transportation of the blood from the clinic to the laboratory, did the courier service do it within the 12 or 24 hours that's stipulated, or did it get lost along the way, and now the sample's not valid anymore because it got to the lab too late? So those are examples of errors that lead to defects, and I think that when you look at what we do from an integration perspective, and how we look at addressing issues and errors, it looks at those. So your base system might be very rigid, very, very rigorous, but it's all of those things outside of it that make the difference.
And you and I both come from a brewing background, and this is so true in brewing, right? You can't wait till the end of an 18-day brewing cycle to say, oh my gosh, this is terrible beer, just dump it down the drain and lose a couple of 100,000 liters. You got to catch it while it's in process of going wrong, right? Which is the whole principle of this, detect measures and track measures as the process is running. Now, unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry runs with this hangover of, well, we just make 300 days worth of inventory because we're going to spread it all over the show. And if we only have 3/4 of a batch that passes all the tests, and we find that out when it's ready to be shipped and say, oh, 25% of this wasn't a spec, we're still safe, right? Patients are still going to get their product. And unfortunately, that's not true anymore. And the pandemic has really highlighted the fact that you've got variable demand happening at all sorts of different places, and you've got constrained supply that's coming out of a supply network, and you've got to match these things up. And so you can't be finding out that products don't meet spec just before they get to the patient. You got to catch that stuff inside of the process because you have limited resources to make the product. So it's a brilliant story, and I think it emphasizes a really important point, and that is, you have to have real-time visibility of these issues and events as they occur, be able to put together agile process teams as quickly as you can, and do the analysis to come up with the right answers and the corrections so that this goes away and doesn't just pop up elsewhere in the system. So I think just in that, your story has emphasized a really important point. So Dino, yeah.
Sorry, just to add to what you're saying, participation of everyone, because everyone can contribute to the improvement process itself, and I think that's also an important part of what we do.
And I think, again, to play the people, process, technology, and leadership, that's the point, right? You can't do this with just technology. You can't do this just by fixing a process. You've got to have the leadership and the people element. So Dino, this has been really, really great. And, if you had to leave a piece of advice for anybody listening to this, who's, first of all, as context, is looking at the performance of an end-to-end supply chain, let's be specific, let's call it healthcare, and make one piece of recommendation around, achieving levels of agility, resilience, and reliability that we're looking for going forward into the future, that we haven't seen out of the pandemic. What couple of nuggets of advice would you leave the listener with?
Yeah, look, it's difficult to articulate that in a succinct sentence. I think that ultimately any system can be improved. I think that the world that we live in is such that it is moving, and in your own area, in your own segment of industry, it is a treadmill. If you're standing still, you will be going backwards. And I think every industry needs to put, or every company needs to put themselves on a journey of improvement. It's like going to the gym. You have to keep fit. I think that for me, that the structure that you put around improvement processes needs to be that you need to put the same effort on that as you do to other business processes. So the improvement process itself needs to be a standard business process, if I can put it that way. That would be the one thing that I would think is imperative.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are so many companies out there that have spent over $1 billion on their ERP system. Let's not pick on a vendor. And the CEO kind of with the leadership team thought, well, we've bought everything we need to run this business. But yes, we bought it from a inside out point of view based on forecasts. Yes, that's fine. It could plan against a forecast, but go change the demand and go make the supply variable. And, the traditional investments of $1 billion in ERP systems is simply not good enough. So, this has been really great, Dino, and I appreciate your insights. I mean, it comes at a very timely point for TraceLink, obviously, because we're participating with healthcare companies in solving the problems you're talking about. When you have a manufacturer collaborating with a contract manufacturer and you have issues and events that go wrong, You can't just fix the problem and say, okay, that one, sweep it under the carpet, gone away. Let's move on to the next one. Unless you are systematically embarking on a journey of continuous improvement and standardizing and codifying the process, these things will simply come back again in different forms. So any last words of wisdom, Dino? It's been great talking to you.
I won't take credit for this, but a Japanese guru once said that in terms of your context of the supply chain, is that your suppliers are your mirror. If they do well, you do well. Right. So I think for me that always resonated, because you can be extremely good, but especially in some of these very sophisticated supply chains, if you're relying on suppliers that are not that sophisticated, there will be issues.
And the bottom line when you think about that is a great quote, because when you think about it, everybody in the end-to-end supply chain is a supplier except the customer, except the patient, right? So yes. The patient is dependent on every supplier doing their job properly and being able to predict and see that properly. So, Dino, thanks very much again. I really appreciate the time you've spent. It's been lovely to talk to you again.
Thank you.